Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Standout Job Seeker podcast presented by Jobscan. If you're new here, this podcast delivers real-life advice on how to get your next job. And by real-life advice, I mean practical advice that has actually worked in the past. You'll hear from successful job seekers to see what they did to get a job, and you'll hear from career experts to see what they do to help other job seekers get a job. Now, in this episode, I've got a Friday rewind for you. I'm going to play a session from Jobscan's annual virtual summit. This summit attracts over 20,000 attendees and is an industry-leading event for job seekers. The session you're going to hear today is by Nii Ato Bentsi-Enchill, a career coach. Nii Ato was named one of LinkedIn's top voices in job search and careers as one of the top 10 thought leaders in the US and Canada. He made Jobscan's list of top career experts to follow on LinkedIn. He's the founder and head coach of Avenir Careers, and he's done some form of career coaching, counseling, or recruiting for 20 years. So basically, you can trust his advice. The title of the session is How to Tell a Compelling Story with Your Resume. Now, here's what I want you to listen for. As you know, one thing that Jobscan does is help you optimize your resume by showing you the skills and keywords you should highlight. But there's some nuance that goes into that. Do you just list those skills in your skills section or find places to stuff in those keywords? Well, no, that's not the best way. You need to use those skills to inform the experience and achievements you highlight on your resume. And that's exactly what this talk is about, how to tell your story in tangible ways that communicate value to the hiring manager. Now, this session was originally an hour long. I edited it down to 30 minutes. If you want to watch the entire session, it's available on our YouTube channel. Just search for the video, How to Tell a Compelling Story with Your Resume. All right, now let's jump into this session and start learning.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based on where you're joining us from the world today. You could have been anywhere in the world, but chose to spend some time here with us this morning. And so I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate that, because there are a million other places you could be and what other things you could be doing with your time at the moment. Working at Ivy Exec, which was my last full-time job, I had the opportunity to speak to over 5,000 professionals all around the world in different industries, different functions. The majority were mid to senior level executives. And through that experience, I really got to understand the ins and outs and challenges of people's job searches, the commonalities and the challenges that they were facing. And one of the biggest things that came through to me so consistently was when I spoke to individuals and I heard their stories, what they told me verbally didn't match what I saw on paper. There's a big disconnect. And that's what I'm here to try and help you close in terms of that gap on what your resume says about you versus the stories you offer verbally. And storytelling is the missing link between what happens when you speak verbally to individuals and what happens on paper. And that's what we're going to try and do today. Through that experience, through having stops in HR, having stops in recruitment, working at Ivy Exec, of course, getting my master's in mental health counseling, my story is what makes me unique and allows me to deliver and show up the way that I do today. And if you walk away with one thing from today's webinar, I want you all to try and embrace your stories, embrace your narrative, and try and think about what can I do not in spite of my story, but because of my story. Because of my story, I'm here today, and I hope that all of you can be empowered through today's conversation to look at your own story in a new way and try and find different and new ways to articulate it on paper and ultimately verbally. When it comes to your resume, ultimately, this is a document that is a sales document. You're trying to tell a compelling story to get people to take some sort of action. The biggest mistake I see many job seekers make in writing the resume is that it's simply a list of facts and maybe some figures. And the challenge with that is that facts and figures alone aren't enough to move anyone to action or even stir any emotions within anybody. Many studies have shown that stories are up to 22 times more memorable than just facts and figures alone. With your resume, you're hoping to generate a similar sort of reaction that the person is interested or intrigued in who you are, what you have to offer, and they're motivated or moved to pick up the phone and call you to bring you in for an interview. So at the end of the day, you want your resume to be a document that tells a compelling enough story that the individual reading it will have almost no choice but to want to engage with you. when I read a lot of resumes that are in the task and responsibility mode, which many viewers might be at this point, when a bullet point simply dryly communicates a task, for example, lead sales team to generate leads and close and acquire new clients or accounts. That is purely a job description, and it doesn't allow my imagination to do any sort of work in terms of imagining how you do that, what your results look like, and how they can impact and influence me. A resume that includes details and context allows my imagination to do more work beyond what's on the paper, because I get a bit of an insight in terms of how you work, the differences in how you do things versus others, and of course, what were the results that you got, and are those results relevant to me that I want to bring to my organization in order to move my team, my organization forward and reach my goals. The first feature is your headline. The headline is the target role that you're going after, the title that you would have taken from the job description. Then another feature I like to use is these descriptors down here, descriptor 1, 2, 3. This is a way to kind of start the conversation about your branding. You can even offer opportunity to put in keywords. We have the executive summary over here, which many of you are very familiar with. Then also, I like to have a short one-line description of the company that you work for that helps to give context to the reader as to in terms of the environment of the sandbox within which you're playing. Then under your title, we have your scope statement. This is a really great way to tell the story of your role within that company. And finally, of course, the bullet points, which will be telling the actual achievements that you had within each individual role. So we're going to go through all of these in more depth, and I'll show you real examples of what this looks like in practice. So starting again with your resume headline and the descriptors, a way of writing a resume that's kind of fallen out of fashion is having an objective statement at the top of the resume. Hopefully, none of you have this right now, but if you do, it's okay. The headline can effectively replace the objective statement and tell the reader immediately what the title is, what the role is that you're actually going after. Then the descriptor is just below that. Again, it's about starting the branding conversation, letting people know a bit about what you have to offer, who you are, and it can also be leveraged to incorporate keywords into your resume. So here's one example of what this can look like. So the headline is sports marketing manager. This is the role that my client was going after and would immediately let the reader know this is the target that this candidate has. Then just below it are the descriptors. This was constructed after understanding his story and what were the key aspects of what he presented to his target audience. He specialized in partnerships and activations. He was actually very innovative in what he did around strategy, and he liked to curate experiences for customers. And so these were 3 descriptors that I came up with to try and start that branding conversation in terms of who he was and what he had to offer to the world. Activations, strategy, curation, those might be keywords that might be relevant to him within a job posting. And so this is the double-edged sword, if you like, of using the descriptors both to describe who you are, but also offer the opportunity to brand you and start that conversation. So now it's going to be your turn. Take a moment based on what I've shared so far. If you're currently going after a certain role or set of roles, write down the headline you'd most likely put on the top of your resume. And then secondly, what are some descriptor words that you can come up with for yourself based on the examples I showed you? So it'll take a minute or two, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to write down your descriptors. So the next piece I want to focus on is the executive summary. The executive summary is that short paragraph at the top of your resume that many of you have. And I find it's a really great way to really control the narrative when you're introducing yourself to your audience in case your cover letter doesn't get read. And so if you don't currently have an executive summary, that's the core reason I like to have them available, because we don't have any idea whether or not a cover letter will get attention either before or after reading the resume or never. And that's one of the key things. The mindset shift that I want to introduce here is the fact that a summary and a pitch are very different things. And I'm in the camp that an executive pitch is a better way to go as far as creating and orienting that top paragraph on your resume. So the rationale behind this transition is that a summary and a pitch are 2 different animals when it comes to sharing information. If we look here at the definitions, a summary is a brief account of the main points of something. I would think of that as more passive, laid back, and it's got nothing to prove. It's simply capturing a body of work and sharing the key highlights. A pitch, however, is something that's much more forceful. And the goal of a pitch is to make a bid or obtain a contract or other business. And so going back to my allusion to in the beginning of a resume being a sales document, what's the point of a sales document? You want the consumer to buy. In this case, you are the product and you want the consumer, being the employer, to buy you in the form of paying you your salary. And so what's going to be more effective in terms of getting their attention? Will it be a summary? Or would it be an affirmative pitch that's going to get them interested and motivated to engage with you and buy you as the product? And so that's a mind shift that we can hopefully make in terms of how to gear and orient the executive summary. At the end of the day, the employers, and many of you might be hiring managers yourself, have a couple of key questions you're trying to resolve when facing off to and searching for a candidate. You want to know, why should we hire you? Why should we care? And how can you help us? So the employer has to be very selfish and self-focused in terms of what their needs are. And it's your job as a candidate, our job as a candidate, is to really try and give them information that they need to make a solid decision about who we are and what we have to offer. And so you want to assure them as quickly as possible that you're the answer to their needs. And so in comparing a summary to a pitch, in most people's executive summaries that I see before I work on them, it's a broad, high-level outline of almost their whole career history. They tend to list skills and industries, multiple industries that they've been in. It's not very focused or targeted. There are also a lot of empty claims, strong track record of, excellent, ability to do X, Y, Z, but there's no proof of what they've actually done. So it feels like a claim versus an actual outcome. And so we want to think about, how can we show people what we've done versus simply telling people what we've done. And finally, a lot of executive summaries I read in the initial state are very generic. If I took that client's name off the resume and put another client's name on it who's in a similar role or position, it wouldn't make a difference because there's nothing personalized about that content. And so making that shift over to an executive pitch, we want to do a few things. We want a focused overview. I typically do maybe one line, giving a brief career history of where they've been and what they have to offer. Then you really want to go into the value, impact, and the brand. And so what's your value? What can you do for the employer that they're going to care about? Can you increase sales? Can you save money? Can you make operations more efficient? Can you increase customer loyalty? That's what they care about. And can you bring that value? What is your impact? Can you prove the value that you just articulated? Are the quantifiable or qualitative results that you've generated over and over that will demonstrate your impact to the employer and make it feel concrete? And finally, what's your brand? How are you different, better, or unique versus somebody else who's similarly qualified compared to you? And so let's go ahead and see this in action. So this is the executive summary that I wrote for a client who is in venture capital. And so see here, there's a one-liner focused in on summarizing who she is and what she brings to the table as far as her overall career experience. Next, we have her value. What can she do that the employer is going to care about? She's got experience launching a VC fund and creating the strategies and the frameworks that are necessary to do so. So whether she's going to go into a startup situation or established situation, she has experience that's going to be valuable for that employer. Next, what is the proof of her impact? She has deployed $4.3 million across 6 investments. That's her getting things done and showing that she's actually done the work, not just claiming to have a strong track record of deploying investments, which is what some might typically write at a starting point. Then at the very end, this was me trying to capture what makes her different or unique. She has the experience of being a startup founder and also being on the other side of the table as a fund manager. And so she has a great perspective, 360, if you like, of all the people she'd be talking to in any situation as a principal investor. And so this is maybe a unique thing that she brings to the table that perhaps many other candidates do not. And so I try to capture that in terms of telling her story. And finally, this is me just trying to be a little bit cute, but she's applying to an organization where social justice was the focus of what the work was in terms of social impact investing, as this is a way to try and put in a little bit of her why into why she's transitioning from where she was into this new environment and applying to this particular employer. And so that's what an executive summary can look like. I'll show you just one more example and something I did a little bit differently here. So this executive summary, you'll see there are way more metrics in this one because he's in a very metrics driven industry. And so I was able to go really hard, if you like, go really hard in on using numbers to demonstrate his impact and what he does. And hopefully this should grab a reader's attention and say, hey, I really want to speak to Dion. These are numbers that make sense in my world. I wanted someone like Dion on my team. And then this particular client, he came from professional athletic background. He's a pro tennis player and had to secure sponsorships for himself. And so this is not something I often do, but this one-liner is trying to capture a bit of that story and tell a bit more about how unique he is and what he does and offer that to his audience. And I actually ended up in the second version I created for him, moving this one-liner up here under his title. So just letting you know the different options and the flexibility of a resume is truly a living document. And you can find different ways to mix and match and use the ideas that I'm sharing to tell your story better. I know that there's a lot of resume advice out there. There are 3 resume webinars just in this conference. So my advice to you is take what works best for you to tell your own story, whether from me or anyone else, and apply those as best as you can to elevate your own storytelling. So with that said, now it's going to be your turn. So I shared with you that your executive summary should be a bit more focused. What is the broad overview of what you can bring to your audience in terms of your career history? What is the value you can offer? What can you do for them that they are going to care about? Are there any important metrics or results that you have delivered that's going to help them to see you as a good fit for their audience, for the company? And finally, is there anything unique or different about you that you want to highlight that would help you to stand out in a room of people who are arguably equally qualified to you? And so as you work on that for a few minutes, I will put up another example of an executive summary so you have a bit of guidance and get some ideas for what to do with your own. So the next area we're going to focus on are scope statements. And so if you recall back to the outline that I showed you, the scope statement is the short 2 to 3, sometimes 4-line introduction or paragraph under your position title that gives you opportunity to explain to the world what that title means in your company. So I'm going to go in a clockwise order, starting from transitions and promotions. One of my favorite things to do with a scope statement is talk about how someone either was hired for a role or why they're hired for a role or why they're promoted into a role. So for example, hired to expand team's capabilities in data analytics within area X, promoted into newly created role to take on challenge XYZ. So this is a way to tell more of your story with details that wouldn't be accessible typically until you're sitting in an interview chair. And so giving the why behind a promotion or being hired for a role really gives your reader insight into why you versus someone else, but also what was going on at the company at the time that you were hired that might have played a significant part in your hiring. And so ultimately, it might communicate that you were the right person to come put out this fire or solve the challenge or lead this big initiative that was going on at the time. And it's a great introduction to the role and why you're in it. Next, in terms of defining the scope of the role, use an example of a director of finance or, for example, a CFO. A CFO might look really different at different companies. In some companies, a CFO is purely focused on the finances. In other companies, the CFO has HR and IT reporting up to them. And so based on your situation within your own company, your title might mean radically different things. And so it's your opportunity to really highlight the range of things that are on your plate. And so you get to talk about your mission, how big your team is, the size of the budget or P&L that you manage, and really telling the story of the ins and outs, the day-to-day, what's in your role. But of course, keep in mind what's most relevant for your target audience to notice or understand so they can calibrate you versus the role they're applying for. So for example, if you are a program director in nonprofit and you manage a $5 million portfolio of projects, if you're applying to another nonprofit that might be around the same size or a bit bigger, having the number $5 million portfolio on your resume would help them understand, oh, she's at the level that we need, or, oh, she can easily stretch to our $8 million budget. That's not too big a jump. And so you allow them to calibrate you versus others. Next, we have the backdrop for your achievements. If you're clear about the mandate you were handed or the mission that you were given when you walked into a particular role, it lets people understand, okay, what I'm going to maybe see next is I'm going to have achievements around resolving challenges with difficult client accounts, or I'm going to have results around saving money or improving manufacturing processes or different things. But basically, by outlining it in the scope statement, you're sort of setting the stage for what people can expect around what you delivered within the role. And I sort of broached on this already about the context for your title. But again, you get to define and help people understand what your title meant. So giving another example, so let's say you are at a mid-level position, but your responsibilities are that of a position 1 or 2 levels above you. You have a manager title, but you're doing director level work. Having a scope statement will give you the chance to tell people, yes, my title says X, but I'm managing 25 people. I have an X million-dollar budget under my purview, and I'm making really critical business decisions every single day that belie the level my title indicates. And so this is your chance to really explain to folks what you're doing and what your context looks like versus what they might immediately assume or glean just based on your title, which is why I love this tool in terms of telling your story better on your resume. Let's go ahead and see this in action. So using the director of finance example again, this is a scope statement that starts over here. And so in this role, he's promoted to work with senior leadership to work on the financial and strategy for a $4 billion region. So this is immediately calibrating him and what's on his plate to his audience. So if you want to go to another big retail company, they know that this individual has $4 billion under his purview within the region that he's working to manage. You see next that he manages 9 direct reports. You see some of the ins and outs of what's under his purview. You see how many stores he's responsible for. And then some of the nuts and bolts of what he's to do within his role as a regional CFO. And finally, who he reports to. The reason I sometimes incorporate the reporting structure is to let people know where you sit within the organization. This becomes a bit more important the more senior you are, because it lets the reader know how close are you to the C-suite, or are you part of the C-suite and the only person above you is the president or the CEO of the company. And so this gives you the ability to show where you're on the org chart, and therefore the reader with this information or context can compare you to their own context. So that said, let's give you guys an opportunity to give this a shot and start to write down ideas for your scope statement. Think about, why were you hired or promoted into your role? Is there a line you can add about that? What was the mission or mandate that you were handed when you walked into the role? Was there a fire to put out? Was there a big new initiative that was about to be launched? Was there a turnaround that was required? What happened when you're being hired, and why were you hired? Then what are the key features of your job that people need to know? So this is a bit about your job description. And in effect, this is the place where I use to handle your job description. Rather than it being in the bullet points, which gets long and mundane, we summarize the high points, the key moving parts people need to know in the scope statement. And then if it's helpful or relevant, budget, how many people you manage, your reporting structure, and those ins and outs, that's what can comprise your scope statement. I'll give you a couple minutes to work on that. So the last part we're going to look at is your bullet points. So this is really the meat and bones of a resume, is what did you do? And so when I work with clients, I typically have them communicate their achievement stories to me through the CAR format, which is challenge, action, result. And if I hadn't said this clearly before, I'll say it right now, that your resume should be a documented record of your achievements, not your responsibilities, your achievements. And so to communicate that, you want them to understand the context. Why did you get involved? What was broken that you had to fix? How badly was it broken before you got involved and then came in to fix it? That's the challenge. The action, what were the most influential steps you took in order to resolve the challenge that you articulated? Finally, the result. Was there a quantifiable or qualitative outcome that you can report? And so just to put a fine point on this, quantifiable outcomes and qualitative outcomes are equally valid. Not all of us have a ton of numbers and metrics by which our job and our effectiveness is measured. And so maybe in your world, numbers aren't as accessible, but you created a new process or a new product, you created a new program, you improved a communication process, you generated a new document, a template. Those are all qualitative outcomes that are equally valid to being able to say, I raised $1 million in revenues. It's equally valid in my book, and you should feel confident in sharing those qualitative outcomes as well as quantifiable ones. And just another quick plug whilst I'm on this point, you can always quantify the nouns in your world. People, clients, number of projects, the nouns, the physical things or the digital physical things that you have, you can quantify those to help round out the story and make it feel more concrete to your readers. This final part, number 4, why does it matter? I had a client tell me they helped to expand an optics portfolio at a company that he worked for. In interrogating that story further, I found out that this portfolio of products didn't exist until he got there. That is a world of difference in understanding between I helped expand something versus I initiated, originated, or created this new portfolio of products that didn't exist prior to my arrival. So that's the why it mattered, because it was new and didn't exist before. And so be sure as often as possible to share the why of why your achievement matters, because without it, your achievement may not be received as impactfully as it could. Whenever you read a story in a newspaper or a magazine, their goal is to leave you walking away as informed as possible, especially let's use a newspaper as that example. I took this quote here. There's nothing more frustrating for the reader than finishing a story with unanswered questions still hanging. And so while we can't answer every single question within a resume, that's what the interview is for, you want to try and anticipate some of those natural follow-up questions that might occur if you're having a conversation with somebody about what you do. And so acting as a journalist, interrogating your own story is the vehicle through which you can progress what you talk about in your resume. So the who is involved in what you did? Did you work with another team, an external vendor, what have you? What were the key results that you generated? Of course, that's important. When did you do things ahead of schedule, in a condensed schedule, in a record time, within this fiscal year, or was it last year? So using time as a vehicle to tell your story can be really impactful. Where did this happen? Was there a market conflict or an internal conflict or challenge you had to face in working through this achievement? Why does it matter? We just went over that. And one of the key part is, how did you accomplish this? By displaying or showing your math, if you like, in terms of how you went about resolving a challenge, helps for you to understand your methodology or where your talents lie, even as far as approaching and resolving problems. And so by thinking about which of these journalistic questions can I use to make this bullet point better is a really excellent way to advance your own storytelling within your resume. What is a natural follow-up question that someone will ask me after they read this one line? Okay, let me put it in a what? Let me put it in a why. We're not going to be able to use all of them once again, but 1 or 2 of them may really advance your story beyond where it was. So very quickly, seeing this in action, we'll use this marketing example. So here we'll go with this first example. This client spiked sponsorship revenue by 30%, securing new multi-year deals with brands by curating tiered sponsorship packages, offering consumer touch points through the JPMCC series. So I have a metric, I have the outcome, I have the how of it all in terms of how he did it, and I have the who in terms of who the target recipient of the benefit was, the JPMCC series, and who in terms of the brands that he established new deals with. And so by, again, using those journalistic questions, I was able to develop the story further based on the car story that he generated. To be fair, all this was generated using one car story because I had the different moving parts I needed to craft this information. And so by using the challenge action result format to break out your stories, you can figure out the moving parts you need in order to translate them into bullet points here. So first and foremost, context is king, or maybe even queen. Relevancy is definitely king when it comes to your resume, but context would certainly be queen. It's really important to contextualize what it is that you've done. Otherwise, your reader won't know how important or impactful or influential it was because they weren't there with you working in the company. There's this joke that supposedly old folks say, you know, I used to walk uphill both ways to school in the snow with no shoes. So obviously that's exaggerating. It's kind of wild and crazy, but they're painting a picture of how difficult times were way back in the day and how us youngins have it super easy with all our modern conveniences. So if you let people know how badly things are broken, that you beat a predecessor in doing this, how this was the first ever product or process in the company, it really makes a difference in understanding why what you did was so great. Your unique way of doing things. There are 2 product managers. One of them is really technically proficient, and one of them is really proficient in relationship management. Both of them get amazing results, but take two different routes to get there. So what's your flavor? What's your route? How do you uniquely do things? By including the details of how you did something, that can help you to lean into and display your talents even within your resume and show how you stand out versus others. And finally, just to put the final last point on it, relevance is your number one criteria. With using that Michelangelo analogy one more time, everything that wasn't David's statue, he carved away. So in your resume, anything that's not going to help you get that next job just doesn't belong on your resume. So really be strategic and try to be as thoughtful as you can in position the content to help you get that next job. I hope this has been helpful. Please do feel free to keep in touch. Please do reach out on LinkedIn or via email for us to continue the conversation.
Wasn't that a great talk? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did and came away with some ideas for how to improve your resume and approach your job search with confidence. I'm going to link to the full session in the description, as well as Nii Ato's LinkedIn page. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review and subscribe. If you want to try Jobscan's tools for free, go to jobscan.co and sign up for a free 2-week trial. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.